There was a muffled sound on that market day, the sound of a forgotten soul. Voices overlapped, vendors shouting prices, children running between stalls, bags dragging across the dusty floor. But in the darkest corner of the square, among empty boxes piled up and remains of fruit on the ground, a woman stood motionless. She didn't scream, she didn't call, she didn't cry. I just stared. His eyes were not there. They were trapped somewhere where time had already stopped, as if they were looking for an old face among the hurried faces that passed by. No one saw her. No one asked. It was as if it were part of the forgotten garbage at the end of the market. She was too clean for that floor. The light blue dress, ironed carefully, clashed with the dry clay that stained her feet. The scarf in her hair was still gently pinned. There was no sign of abandonment on his body, except in his eyes. That look said what the mouth could no longer do. Where am I? Who am I? Why did they leave me here? Each person who passed by fed the silence that surrounded them. It was as if the world had learned to ignore what it doesn't understand. And there, in the midst of a crowd, she was invisible, not because it was dirty, confused, or aimless, but because for many his presence there simply didn't make sense. And what doesn't make sense we avoid, hide, erase with your eyes. In another time, perhaps she would have been respected. Perhaps there was a chair waiting for her in the shade of a baobab, with hot tea and grandchildren on her lap. But on that day at that fair, she was just a woman too old to be alone, and it cleans too much to receive compassion. There was a quiet dignity in his gestures, the way he held a bag with both hands, as if it held something precious, the way she kept her spine upright, even while sitting on boxes, the way I expected, as someone who still believes that someone will come. But no one came, not even a question, not even a glance. And then, just as everything seemed sunk into oblivion, a different sound broke the air. Not a scream, but the creaking of a wheel. A wooden wheel, crooked, tied with old wire. A wheelbarrow, driven by a skinny boy, with bare feet and attentive eyes. He didn't bring any grocery. He didn't look for customers. He just walked, and he saw what no one saw. He stopped in front of her, looked, silence. Then in a low but firm voice he asked, "Do you want me to take you?" There was no heroism in that gesture. There was no plan, no hope of reward. There was only one boy who never had anywhere to go, recognizing in her eyes the same emptiness she carried in her chest. He didn't know who she was. I just knew she was alone, and that was enough. She hesitated. He looked around. For the first time, someone was treating her like someone else, like people, as a living memory. She didn't answer with words. She just nodded her head, slowly. And that was the beginning of a road that would change everything. Because sometimes it all starts when someone, even with little, offers what they have, presents. And while he arranged the cloth at the bottom of the cart so as not to scratch her dress, the world kept running, selling, screaming. But there at that moment, a new silence was born. A silence that said, "I see you." And being seen, for those who have already been forgotten, is like breathing again. The wheel creaked again. The cart broke. And with it, the most unlikely story that the market of that city has ever kept on its sidewalk. The path was dirt, flanked by peeling walls and voices that faded as the sun went down. He pushed the cart with both hands firm, but his body trembled with every hole, every stone, every ungrateful climb. The wheel creaked as if it also felt the weight that did not come only from the woman's body. It came from life. His life had never been light. It never had wings nor shortcuts. It was made of dust on her feet, calluses on her hands, and looks that said, "Don't touch it." But that day, there was something different about his journey. He was carrying someone who, even without saying anything, trusted. The old lady, with her hands folded on her lap and her eyes lost in clouds, remained silent. Sometimes he looked at the boy, as if trying to remember an old name. Other times he just closed his eyes, as if resting inside. Her blue dress swayed slightly in the wind, and her hair, which had previously seemed stiff with dignity, now danced softly over her shoulders. And even without speaking, she said it all, that she had already had a lot, that he had already lost even more, that now at last he was at peace. And that boy, whose name she didn't even know, was the reason. People watched from the edge of the houses, without disguise. Some laughed, others whispered. Another one of those street kids trying to take advantage of someone. Poor old woman, she must be senile. But none of them came close. No one offered help, no water, no shade. They saw the scene with the bleary eyes of distrust. Because when someone with nothing carries someone who seems to have everything, the world suspects it, the world judges, the world rejects what it does not understand. But he kept going, one foot in front of the other. The cart swayed, the wheel froze, the slope seemed to have no end. And in the middle of all that effort, there was a detail. He smiled, not with the mouth, but with the chest. It was as if for the first time, pushing someone meant going somewhere. As if for the first time, someone had accepted his presence. He didn't know who she was, but she was there. I trusted him. He slept with his eyes half closed, without fear, and that was enough. They passed a corner where he used to sleep. A piece of cardboard was still there, folded, damp from the last rain. He looked quickly embarrassed, but he said nothing. He only accelerated the pace, because sometimes what hurts the most isn't what's missing, it's what's already been too much. They arrived at a clearing of dry land, with 2 tarpaulins set up between wooden shacks. There he lived, a corner with a pan hanging from it, a blanket sewn with strips of old cloth, and a box where he kept his coins, when he had any. He pulled the cart carefully close to the tarp and, with an almost ceremonial gesture, spread a clean cloth on the floor. Then he held out his hand. The woman accepted. She descended slowly, looking all around her with an eerie serenity. No surprise, no judgment, just presence. He placed it in the driest corner, adjusted the blanket, and poured a thin broth, made with the rest of cassava and water. She accepted, sipping in silence, as if that simple dish were a sacred offering, as if that shelter made of rags was safer than all castles. And that night, while the stars appeared timidly through the clouds, the boy lay down on the ground next to the cart. He said nothing else. He didn't ask for anything. He just breathed. She was already asleep, her feet covered to the tip with a care that no one expected from a forgotten boy. And the cart, that old survival companion, was now a throne, because in that small space, hidden from the world, something rare was born, care without charge, donation without a name, love without a past. The dawn arrived without making a sound. The lights of the city, far away, twinkled as a reminder of a world that was moving at a different pace. But in that tent, time moved with slower steps. There was a different silence. It was not the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of those who, at last, had a place to rest their soul. The boy slept curled up, with his arms wrapped around his legs, as he had done since he was little. The body used to the hard ground no longer complained. But the heart, my heart listened. I heard the faint sounds of the old lady's breathing. I heard the whisper of the wind coming through the cracks. And suddenly he heard something he didn't expect. She named him Raphael. His voice was low, choked, as if he came from a very distant place. A place where the pain still had a name, and the faces had not disappeared. She called him Raphael, and wept, not of sadness, but of memory. She cried as if she were rediscovering a part of herself, as if for a second he believed that time was coming back. The boy, still between sleep and wakefulness, did not understand, but he was silent, heard, and when she said, "Forgive, Mom, forgive me," he felt the weight of something that was not his, but that crossed it. She was talking to someone who wasn't there, with a child, with a spirit, to blame. Nobody knows, but there was truth in that confusion, a truth that only the old know when they no longer need to feign strength. She spoke of a white house, of a gate that never opened again, of letters that no one answered. And in the middle of these loose words, she called his name again, Raphael. The boy stared at the makeshift ceiling of the tarp, trying to figure out who that name was. His name was not Raphael, but inside, he felt that maybe he could be, because everyone one day was someone who was absent, someone who didn't come back, someone who carried the absence of others on his shoulders. That night, there were no answers, but there was listening. And sometimes listening is all one needs to continue existing. He didn't say anything. He just approached slowly, pulled her blanket up to her chin, and went back to bed. His eyes, once tired of waiting for justice, were now open, not out of fear, but out of care, as if, without knowing it, he had become the guardian of an old pain. And those who guard the pain of others with tenderness begin to heal their own. The sky cleared slowly. The roosters had not yet crowed, but the first birds were already streaking the air with their trills. The city began to move, but in that tent, time still rested. She slept, perhaps dreaming of a distant childhood. And he, with his eyes open, thought. He thought about the name he received without asking. I thought about the trust that was born without promises. He thought about the mystery of being seen by someone who didn't even know him, but call him as if he had known him forever. And there, between the dream and the cold ground, a bond was born that not even logic explained. A bond made of shared pain, fragmented memories, gestures that no one expected from a forgotten boy. He didn't know it yet, but at that moment, he was no longer alone. Neither does she, because when two loners recognize each other, even in the dark, something sacred happened, something that neither time, nor abandonment, nor lack can erase. The name Raphael echoed in the silence, not as a mistake, but as a bridge, and sometimes it's through bridges like this that life finds its way back, even if no one is watching. Even though the world is still asleep, the sun was still looking for strength to break through the clouds when the tires began to scratch the dry ground at the entrance to the favela. It was not common to see cars there, much less black, long cars with dark windows and a silent engine. The dust rose with each brake, and the doors opened carefully, as if they were entering a temple. Men in suits came down, some with cell phones in hand, others with papers that trembled in their hand. They looked around suspiciously, as if they were stepping into another world. And they were, because in that cracked piece of earth, their logic didn't make sense. The names they carried in their pockets were not worth there. The boy realized everything even before the shadow of the cars touched the tent cloth. He felt the floor change temperature. He felt the city approaching with his teeth hidden. He stood up and stood in front of her, as if protecting what he still does not understand. The eyes ran between the unknown faces, but the heart said, something will change. And it did. One of the men, older, with a badge on his chest and tears already in his eyes, knelt down. It was not a theatrical reverence. It was a reunion with the soul, with the history, with the shame. Mrs. Ottilia, you are alive. She opened her eyes slowly. She looked at the man as if returning from a dream, and he smiled, a small but whole smile. Recognize. He called him Martinho, his voice choked and firm at the same time. Martin burst into tears. She said they had been looking for her for days. He said Horizon stopped, that the council called the police, that the company's oldest heiress had disappeared without a trace. The boy watched the scene as if witnessing a miracle, but not knowing whether to applaud or run. He didn't understand what Horizon meant, nor the value of the names that echoed at that moment. He only knew that she now owned something much bigger than he could imagine, and that this might change everything. Maybe they would take her away. Maybe he would never come back, and the tent would once again be all mud, hunger, and silence. She looked at him, and in that look there was a decision. He did not utter a word. He just held out his hand, and he held it in front of everyone. Suits, curious, neighbors. That wrinkled hand met his dirty, cracked from pushing the world so much. And the gesture said it all. I don't forget where I was born from. The silence was broken by one of the men, trying to offer the car, the water, the security. She thanked him with firm politeness. He said he would come back. He said there were things to do. But what before? He needed to say goodbye to that ground with respect, because there he found more humanity than in many marble halls. The boy did not answer. He just lowered his eyes. I didn't know if it was the end or the beginning. He only knew that something inside him said that nothing would ever be the same again, that name, Ottilia, now had a place within him, and that the wheelbarrow, a companion in so many struggles, had carried more than weight. It had carried destiny. The cars started their engine, one by one. The dust rose again, and she, before getting into the vehicle, turned to the boy and said, You gave me back more than the way, boy. You gave me back the name. And then she left, not as someone who was leaving, but as someone who was going to prepare to return. And sometimes that's what life does to you. Take it off to reveal, move away to get closer, breaks to restore. That day, the boy stood there, not understanding much, but feeling everything, as if knowing, deep in the soul, that some losses are just a harbinger of a new ground, and that when the cars arrive, bringing the unexpected, it is because the old cycles have already fulfilled their role, and a new name is about to be written, with truth, with dignity, and with memory. She did not come alone, nor did she bring empty promises. He brought eyes that now saw differently. He brought silence that now held mature words. I brought a new map to the same place. Cars no longer parked on the edge. They stopped inside, between shacks and dust. They opened the doors not in a hurry, but with reverence. And she came down wearing something simple, but with a face full of firmness. She walked to the boy, who was waiting for her, as if she did not know if she could still dream. She looked at him as one who looks at a root, not a passing leaf. and he said in a clear voice, "I built buildings, many, high, beautiful, but I never built a real house." The phrase fell like water on a dry stone. The boy did not answer, but inside him something sprouted, because in that confession, there was more than repentance. There was purpose. She walked among the tarpaulins, as if recognizing a sacred field. He touched rotten wood, looked at broken tiles, smelled the smell of burnt food on the stove. And he didn't look away, because now all that was part of it too. Every crack, every hole, every leftover. Next to it, architects drew in a hurry, but she asked for calm. No rush, no window dressing. That was not a donation. It was retribution. And it started with the boy's tent. He turned the threadbare cloth into a wall. The beaten ground became a floor. The stone stove gave way to a safe stove, but she made sure to keep the blanket patched. He had it framed. "This blanket gave me back my peace," he said. And no one argued. More than structures, it is built presence. He sat down with the neighbors. He listened to the women. He listened to the men. It gave space for the children to say what hurt. And little by little, the community opened up like a flower in the face of the rain. Not because someone rich arrived, but because someone who remembered what it was like to be a person came back. The boy now walked with other steps. He was no longer bent over. He did not carry the wheelbarrow, but still visited the place where he slept. And one day, she called him. He showed him the flat ground, with the ground already cleared and the sign in place. This will be the daycare. Here children will no longer have to carry the silence of adults. Here will flourish what has dried up in me for many years. And in the center of the garden, at the most visible point, was the cart, hand-painted with bright colors, attached to the ground as a sculpture, with a small but precise sign. It was with him that God carried me. The children passed by it every day. Some played, others asked. And the boy, now a volunteer at the new school, counted, not as one bragging, but as one who testifies. He said that car has already taken more than weight. He took faith. It took dignity. It took the most important woman he had ever met back to herself. And the lady, now called Aunt Otelia by everyone, did not stop. He kept building. But each gesture of hers carried something new, a humility that cannot be learned from books, a respect that is only born from recognized pain. She always said the same phrase to those who tried to applaud too much. "I did nothing more than give it back, because what saved me was not a hospital, nor a company. It was a boy in his wooden cart. And that not all the money in the world buys." And the boy understood, because inside him, what grew was not vanity. It was root of something that started small, but deep, like all true faith. In that land where before there was only abandonment, now songs sprouted, and laughs, and stories that no one else was afraid to tell. Because when someone with power decides to listen, when someone with a memory decides to stay, the world starts again, the right way, the way it heals, and it stays. Time passed, but the silence of that morning was never forgotten. It was opening day. The daycare center was ready. The children came hand in hand, with new uniforms and bright eyes. The mothers looked at everything with that mixture of distrust and gratitude. The parents, silent, held the tools they had used in recent weeks to build what was now called Casa de Reais. In the center of the courtyard, between wooden benches and newly planted trees, the cart remained, painted, varnished, with flowers all around. It was not a monument. He was a witness. It was seed. The lady approached with slow steps, holding a small coin between her fingers. It wasn't gold. It was not a relic. It was a memory. The same coin he carried in his pocket on the day he got lost at the fair. The same one that, deep down, was all he had when he forgot who he was. She looked at the boy, now almost a boy, and, without saying a word, put the coin into the cart, not as one who offered, but as if giving back, as if honoring. And there, in front of everyone, he only said, "Let no one else carry the weight of forgetfulness alone." There was silence, a silence that did not ask for applause, nor speeches. It was the kind of silence that heals, that he says, "What a firm." The daycare center started operating. Childish screams filled the corridor. The walls gained drawings, and the little feet stepped on the floor, as if that place had always existed. But the elders knew. They knew that all this was born of an improbable gesture, of a nameless boy and an old lady aimless. And that's why they respected it, cared, guarded. Tia Otelia began to be sought after by journalists, politicians, businessmen. But she refused interviews. He refused formal tributes. He said that his story only made sense there among those people, among those voices, and that every word spoken outside that ground would be wind. And wind, no matter how beautiful it sounds, passes. The boy remained there. He grew with the project. He studied with the support of discreet donations from the lady. He became an educator, not those who write on the board, but of those who sit on the floor, who look you in the eye, who remember the names of the children's pains before they teach the letters. And every afternoon, before leaving, he passed by the cart. He touched the wood as if thanking, as if praying, like someone who remembers. Because memory does not live in books. It lives in the gestures that we repeat with respect. It dwells in the simple objects that have witnessed silent miracles. It dwells in the eyes of those who were saved not by charity, but by gratitude. Ottilia no longer came every day. Age called for rest. But whenever he could, he sat on the porch and watched from a distance. I saw the children running, the boy now a man teaching, the garden growing, and smiled. A smile without noise, but full, as if he knows that his absence from before has been re-signified. As someone who understands that he did not return just to find his way again, he returned to leave a trail. And in that space where everything seemed impossible, there was now one certainty. When someone chooses to see the invisible, history changes. Not only yours, but of everyone around. Because seeing the other, truly, is the beginning of every transformation that lasts. And the cart, motionless in the middle of the courtyard, kept saying that. No voice, but with soul. It was late afternoon. The sky was tinged with golden hues, as if the sun asked permission before leaving. In the courtyard of the daycare, the children were already at home, the toys collected, the benches empty. The silence returned like a familiar visitor. And in the midst of this silence, a table was set, simple, made of light wood, with 2 deep plates and 2 crooked spoons. No ceremony, just the promise of a conversation kept in time. Ottilia sat on one side, the boy, now boy, on the other. The eyes met as always. No hurry, no charge. There was something there that didn't depend on words. But even so, she spoke. I thought I was saving you, but deep down, it was you who was pulling me back. He didn't know how to answer. I never knew, because certain thanks cannot be explained. They only sustain themselves with presence, with permanence, with bread divided. She told about her childhood, about the father who left without looking back, about the mother who sewed dresses she could never wear, about the day he first climbed a glass elevator and decided never to go down. And it went down even so, when he forgot who he was, when he lost his name, when she found herself sitting at the market, waiting for a face that didn't come, until he arrived. When you called me, it was as if I remembered who I was before the money, before the meetings, before the rush. He listened in silence, but inside, something was burning, because he also had stories, stories that no one has ever asked, stories that did not make headlines, who didn't have a famous name. But now, perhaps, they also deserve to be said. He said he never had a father, that his mother disappeared one day without leaving a note, who learned to eat from the garbage before learning to write his own name, and that, even so, he never lost a desire to be useful. Not a hero, not an example, only useful, only someone who helps to carry when the other cannot. She held his hand, the same hand that pushed the cart, that covered her feet on that cold night, that held her fear without shedding tears. And there, between 2 simple dishes, they sealed something that no law or scripture is able to seal, soul covenant. Ottilia got up with difficulty. He walked to the entrance of the daycare. The lights came on little by little. In the garden, the cart gleamed under the last ray of sunshine. She looked at him one last time and said, "Here is the altar, not religion, but from memory, not gold, but really." That night, she did not return home. He stayed in the daycare. He slept there, as if the cycle needed to close where it began. In the morning, they found her sitting, eyes closed, hands on her lap, as on that first time at the fair. But this time, there was peace, and name, and legacy. The boy, now a man, did not cry. He only covered her feet, like on that ancient night. Then he left in silence, and went to open the daycare, because the world does not stop. And faith, when true, sits at the table, but also gets up to continue serving. Even after the match, the cart was still there, steadfast, property, sacred, as a promise fulfilled, as a living heritage, as an altar of faith that never needed to scream to exist. All he had to do was walk. All you had to do was load. It was enough to stay. The daycare center remained alive, with laughter, with the stumbling blocks, with the cries of a child and the silences of an adult that only time heals. But even among so many novelties, there was something that never changed. The cart. He stayed there, in the same place, as if it were roots. The children grew up and learned the story. Some invented details, as if it were legend. They said that the cart had powers. That took people to heaven. That it was lucky if touched before the test. But the elders knew he had no magic. There was truth, and the truth, when well told, also transformed. The boy, who was now called a teacher, did not correct his fantasy. He let the children's imagination dance around the symbol, because I knew that, deep down, all stories that he'll need a little mystery. One afternoon, while sweeping the courtyard, he found a flower sprouting on the side of the cart. It was not planted. No one watered it, but she was there, small, purple, firm. He smiled. He knelt before her, as if recognizing a small miracle. He didn't tell anyone. He only kept within his chest a sign that the right things flourish when the soil is right. In the boardroom, on the table where Ottilia liked to leave notes, there was now a framed photo. In it, she and the boy on the day of the inauguration, hands in hand, eyes resting on the cart. It was more than an image. It was a testimony. Whoever arrived, saw. Whoever read, understood. Those who sat there learned that education is not born from chalk. It is born from the gesture. From time to time, important visitors came. They wanted to expand the project, make franchises, spread the name Casa de Reais throughout the country. But the boy politely refused. He said that what was born there could not be replicated in a hurry, that the seed does not accept to be pushed. She needs time, of shadow, of solo with history. And so, the daycare center was maintained, simple, true, with the smell of lunch on the balcony and whispered prayers before the activities. No promises of success, no catchphrases, but with attentive eyes, with welcoming hands, with ears that hear what most don't want to hear. Sometimes, at dusk, the teacher would sit in the shade of the baobab tree planted at the back of the courtyard. It was the last tree that Ottilia asked for. He said that every root needs a shade that inspires. And there he stayed, listening to the wind, remembering the lady, the days of the cart, the tent, the thin broth. One of these afternoons, a child came and asked, "Uncle, does the cart still carry people?" He thought. He smiled slowly, and he replied, "Yes, it does, but now it's inside." The child ran back to play, satisfied, and he stayed there, in silence, but whole, because he knew that, somehow, that boy who one day pushed a lost old woman didn't just carry a woman. He carried a story. It carried a generation. And when night fell, soft as a veil on the shoulders of the village, the cart shone in the starlight. I don't eat metal, but as a memory that does not fade, because it was born from the simplest gesture. And simple gestures, when done with truth, never die. They just turn into shadow, in bloom, in a name whispered in time, in a living root in the heart of those who continue. The daycare center grew without losing ground. The garden expanded. The cart was maintained. The boy, now a grown man, had gained gray hair before his time, not of old age, but of surrender, because those who care with their whole heart age beautifully, inside and out. One day, he decided to do something different. He walked to the corner where it all began, the old piece of land where many years before he had slept wrapped in a rag blanket. It was empty now. The wind blew as it did that day, but there was peace. He dug a small hole with his bare hands, not to bury sadness, but to plant memory. He took a coin out of his pocket. It was not Ottilia's coin. That one remained in the cart, protected. That was another, no apparent value. But with history, it was the first one who had won honestly, carrying bags in the market. The first one he didn't ask for. The first one that came with dignity. He looked at the earth, took a deep breath, and said, "It's not money that changes life. That's what we do with it. That's what we plant." And then he buried the coin, covered carefully. He made a gesture with his hands, as if blessing the ground, and it stayed there, in silence, again, because the truest cycles always come back to where they started. But they come back with another look. In the daycare, the children learned songs that spoke of the stroller. They made drawings. They created pieces. They invented alternative endings for the story. But they always returned to the same place, the boy's gesture, the lady's choice. the moment when the world turned to a new side. On one of those days, a small girl with colorful braids and a small smile asked, "Uncle, does Faith smell?" He knelt down. He looked her in the eyes and replied, as if telling a secret, "Yes, there is. Smell of wet earth. Smell of broken bread. Smell of old blanket on a cold day. Smell of hug when no one else believes it." She laughed, and she ran to tell her friends. And he stood there with his chest full of what is not named, but felt. Otelia was already a living memory in each room, your name in every story. His absence, constant presence. There were no too many portraits. There were gestures, mores, silences respected, places of listening. Ways back, and the cart, firmly in the center of the garden, was visited every day, not by tourists, but for hearts, simple people, marked people, people who have already lost and found it, who has already fallen and risen, who was once invisible and now wants to see. On a rainy morning, the professor found a flower growing exactly where he had planted the coin. It was a strange, different flower with asymmetrical petals. She was not beautiful to the common eye, but she was alive, and that was enough. He knelt down again. It touched the ground. He closed his eyes, and in that gesture, once again, everything connected, the past, the present, what will come. Because when faith is planted in silence, with clean hands and an attentive heart, it flourishes. Maybe not in the time we want, maybe not in the way we imagine, but it flourishes. It always blooms. And there, where a boy one day took a lost lady in his wheelbarrow, the world has learned that good does not scream. He walks, it serves. He bends down. He offers himself. It transforms, not with promises, but with roots, with choices, with steps that don't give up, with faith that is planted, and it flourishes in silence, indeed, in eternity. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive more stories like this, told calmly, truthfully, and faithfully. Leave your like and comment below what touched you the most. Sometimes your word could be the cart that carries someone back to you. And share, because when a story heals, it needs to be carried forward, like the cart, like faith, like the love that does not forget.